Hey man, welcome back to Three-Peat Sports. I'm your host, Ian Money Monhay, and I guess we'll just jump into it. Sheesh! Oh my God. Um, I've throughout my 10 years of being a Suns fan, I've been accustomed to 30-point losses, 40-point losses. I went to the Suns opener 5 years ago in Josh Jackson's rookie year. We lost by 50, and I stuck throughout all of that. In high school, I witnessed my senior year, my high school basketball team lose by 40, 50, even 60 at one point. So it sucks to say that I've gotten accustomed to that. But another game where it's just super disheartening, and you know, you I don't want to react totally off of emotion because at the end of the day, this isn't a game review. This is something completely different. But just to recap the game, Boston whooped Phoenix. I believe they scored 125. I believe we were still in like the 90s. I I kind of tuned out by the start of the second half, and it was pretty depressing, man. It's this that was the best team in the league, and they clearly displayed our weaknesses in a very merciless way, to say the least. Book had an off game. This was Chris Paul's first game back, and I guess the one thing that I'll say about CP, yes, he did not look good again, but there is also, he looked faster, much faster than he did uh, by the end of the Dallas series at any point in the season when he was playing this season. So that's the only encouraging thing that I could see. And Josh Okogie, he had a career high tonight, was 28 points. It's cool to see a young bench guy. He doesn't have the most upside in the world. He's pretty much established as this is his fourth year, fifth year in the league. So I don't expect this on a night to night basis, but it's cool to see that, he ended up doing something. And it's really hard to take positives out of that, especially since this was already a scheduled episode. I was already scheduled to record this by after the game, and now it just kind of looks like a totally reactionary episode. But we'll just jump right into what I have going on right now. Um, the Phoenix Suns, they moved to 16-9. They moved out of their first place spot and now are second in the West, behind the New Orleans Pelicans, who we play twice in the next couple of days and three times in the next week and a half. So that's going to be a fun matchup. But Phoenix is in a weird situation right now where they clearly have a superstar in Devin Booker, and he's the only guy that's able to get some points up there. That's what it feels like. There's been some points where Mikal Bridges has looked really good. There's been some points where DeAndre Ayton has looked really good. Even Campaign, he played very solidly as a starter this year so far. But there's very clearly before this game some obvious needs, and they have some obvious trade candidates. And the the trade deadline is going to come much sooner than everybody really thinks it is. I think it comes like on February 11th, February 12th, sometime mid-February. But the unofficial draft season starts in about a week. I'm recording this on December 7th, so this would be 8 days from now is when more than half of the league becomes available for trade due to the contract restrictions and whatnot. And that's when unofficial trade season starts, and it's going to be very exciting to see how teams end up going about this deadline. I'm pretty sure every NBA fan knows of the kid Victor Wembanyama, and that's the most hyped up prospect in years. And it's going to be interesting to see the amount of teams that end up getting rid of some of their really good players in order to try and tank, get better odds at landing a guy like that. Even then, I'm still really high on Scoot Henderson so far. I really like the Thompson twins. Nolan Smith, I believe that's his name. The kid from I'm kind of not in the draft prospects at this moment in time. We'll get into that in a couple months from now. But, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. And Phoenix being a buyer at this point in time and them having some salary available to trade away, and it's there's players that are to be had with the salaries that they do have, and being able to upgrade at their positions of need. So I figured I'd do a NBA trade deadline preview specifically for the Suns. I'm kind of Sun centric right now. It's pretty hard to tune into every team at this moment in time. School just ended for this semester. I've been at work for the most part as well. And I've been speaking most of this stuff on uh, Blaze Radio with on Triple Double. If you guys have tuned in with me, Luca Giolani, Will Horan, Danny Sullivan, Griffin Greenberg, you know, throughout the semester we talked NBA for an hour from 4 to 5 every Thursday on Blaze Radio, and that's been really fun, and that's where I've displayed most, if not all, of my NBA thoughts. And since we're going to be gone for this break, I figured I'd do this. I think that this is going to be a pretty fun exercise to kind of go through what the Suns really need to do, because it's good that we cooled off a little bit after Book had his stretch of 40-point games and Da had his Player of the Week accolade announced, and it's good that we're off of that high and now we can come back to reality and say, hey, there's still some very clear needs. So enough of me dancing around. Let's get into it. I think we'll just start off with needs. I have everything on my phone right here. In terms of needs, I mean, there's quite a bit, honestly. I recently had a question answered by I would say, the biggest Suns podcast out there, the Timeline, a Phoenix Suns podcast. Um, and basically, what I was trying to, allude to was, I think that this team needs an influx of youth somewhere. Dwayne Washington is like our only sense of like a young guy with a level of potential as this shot creator, right? He's not much of a defender at this point in time, and he's rarely playing. He's a two-way contract, so he's that's like our only young guy, and he's not playing at this moment in time. I think that you look around the league, like Golden State. They have a number of young players, and yeah, it may not be working out as much as people want them to be since they're defending NBA champions. But you look at Golden State, and if they're blowing a team out, they'll have a young guy or two or three, or maybe the whole lineup, where it's just an influx of young guys that have a level of potential and just throw them out there for 10, 12 minutes and see what they can do. Phoenix is one of the oldest teams in the league, and they don't have that sort of influx of youth. And I think that especially with a guy in Chris Paul, who's, his time's running out, man. I think that his prime is just about over and just about finished. And I think that they really need to start preparing to get some fresher legs up in here. I would also say that, I think one of the biggest needs that every Suns fan has been hammering the table for the longest time now is shot creation. We were begging for that ever since last year's deadline. Uh, we were all very high on Eric Gordon from Houston. He's since tailed off, but it was very clear in that Dallas series that outside of Book, Dallas was not afraid of anybody else on that roster. When it came to McHale creating his own shot and doing it with consistency, DeAndre Ayton creating his own shot and doing it with consistency, and everybody else up and down the roster, there's a very clear need for shot creation on this team, and it was especially displayed tonight as well, where Book had an off night again, and nobody was really picking up the slack. They scored 52 points through 3.5 quarters. So that there's something that needs to happen, whether that's in the bench or in their starting lineup, where there's got to be more shot creation. I would also say that this team also needs some length on the wing, along with athleticism on the wing. I think you'd look at a team like Boston right now, who I think right now is the model team in the NBA when it comes to roster construction. Brad Stevens has done an amazing job with getting in playmakers and trying to upgrade the roster after, losing in the finals to as much of a degree as he has. Bringing in Malcolm Brogdon, bringing in Blake Griffin has actually been such a big thing for this team now that Al Horford is out and Time Lord is out, although he should be back in the next couple of weeks. uh, Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown. Those are two guys that can create their own shots. They have guys that can play make for them, and they have the ability to just stand in the corner for a little bit and let the other guys cook. And Phoenix doesn't have that luxury by any stretch of the imagination. It's Book having to initiate for everybody else and set everybody else up for success, or he's getting his own shot. And that's really hard for him at this point in time. He may have laid a stinker. I'm not going to give him any benefit of the doubt for today because everybody played like shit. Excuse my language. But there's a very clear need for somebody else next to him to get some shots up, get some buckets. And I think we could also move to rim pressure, which is my last need for this team. Somebody to get to the free throw line, somebody to draw fouls, attack the basket with confidence, and is able to finish it pretty well. You take a look at a guy like Chris Paul at this stage of his career. He's a smaller guy, sure, but was always a pretty solid finisher around the basket. And now he's kind of avoiding the contact, kind of trying to snake dribble out of pick and rolls and do these fadeaways from the mid range. Mikhail's not much of an attacker. He's more so a finesse finisher. Same with a guy like DeAndre Ayton. Bismack Biyombo has no offense to his game outside of being a lob threat. There's not a whole lot of guys that's able to get to the free throw line. I think we're one of the five worst teams when it comes to drawing fouls and getting to the free throw line. So I think that there is a level to that. There's an element to the offense that's still very much missing. And as much as Booker has done a pretty solid job at, making it a point to drive to the basket, not everybody else is doing it at a consistent level. So that's like four needs right there. And there's not a whole lot of players that they have on their roster with good upside, good value that can bring in those types of players. But there are some players on their roster that are either sitting out right now or just, it's very obvious that these guys are trade candidates. I have three up. I have a wild card as well. Um, and we'll start with the obvious one, Jay Crowder, who has been holding out since training camp. I thought it was pretty obvious that he was not going to come back to Phoenix after they agreed to part ways and seek a trade. When it came to Jay Crowder leaving Miami to come to Phoenix, Jay Crowder left Miami ultimately, for the long-term security and having a starting spot. He was offered $16 million for 1 year to return to Miami, and he said no. He wants the long-term security. Got 3 years, $30 million here, and I'm assuming that's the case here. In Phoenix right now. That's why he's holding out. He's 32, 33. He wants to cash in on one last contract. He's on an expiring right now. I would assume that he also wants to win a chip. And he's in a contract year and he wants to be a starter. In order to cash in on whatever money he's seeking, he's got to be starting. And he wasn't going to get that here. And I think he has too big of an ego now. For him to backtrack and come back to this team. I don't think that's going to come anymore. I think his time in Phoenix is done. He is a $10.1 million expiring. And I'll just put it like this. I don't think that he had much value in the first place on the trade market. He's a nice 3-and-D wing that has, good upper body strength and, good post defense and good but inconsistent 3-point shooting. But, that type of archetype was only valued by contenders, and contenders don't have much to offer for role players in the first place. So, I use the baseline of Jay Crowder for Grayson Allen is the standard when it comes to any Jay Crowder trade. If it came to that, I think that the value is similar to it, when, before he even requested a trade, and I think that's still the same now because there's only a select few teams that would be interested in Crowder's services. And I think that, I guess to talk about Crowder a little bit more, the one thing that I'll warn teams about is he is a really bad first round performer. I think there was at one point he was like one of 20 something from 3-point land. And he just keeps shooting it. He keeps firing it. And it displays a level of confidence in himself. And I appreciate that to some degree. But, that's just a warning for people out there. It's a matter of you got to get past the first round. And once you get past the first round, Jay Crowder really does a pretty good job at, showing up in his role. What else would it, also be funny? He's a pretty solid rebounder, and, with 5, 6 a game. Um, it's funny when it comes to his scoring averages, though. He'll have a game where he's just on fire. You either get Zaza Pachulia or you get Steph Curry from the 3-point line. He'll have 20, 21, 22 points in one game with really good efficiency and all of them coming from the 3-point land. And then he'll have a game the next game where he'll have 1, 2, 3 points on some really bad shooting, and that evens out to 10 points a game. And that's the funny inconsistency about that. I will also add that last year he's been trying to work on his game a little bit more. He added a floater to his game last year, and that was pretty successful from what I can remember and what I remember seeing. So there is an element of his offense that he's trying to evolve a little bit more to provide some more value to these contenders and probably for himself as well when it comes to contract. But it's very tough to see Jay Crowder bringing back humongous value back to Phoenix in terms of what kind of guys that Phoenix should be looking to get. But that's the obvious trade candidate. Phoenix is going to make a trade, and he's going to be the centerpiece of it. If not, we'll get into that soon. Second person I have up here is Dario Saric. He's on a 1-year, $9.2 million expiring. It's been a weird tenure in Phoenix for him. He came over in the Cam Johnson trade, and he was slotted in to start next to DeAndre Ayton. If you remember, that lineup originally was Rubio, Book, Kelly Oubre, Saric, and DeAndre Ayton. And Dario just did not fit very well next to DeAndre Ayton. He likes working from the inside, which has been a consistent thing when he's played this season. It was consistent when he played 2 seasons ago. And he's able to stretch the floor, but I don't think that that's his game in particular. I think that he needs the ball a little bit more in order to initiate some sort of like pick and pop game. I think that's where his ability to stretch the floor is uh, really defined. But he played in Phoenix, didn't really play too well at the start. He was even being shopped for a late first, and they couldn't get that in his first season. Bubble comes around, reverts to a stretch 5 off the bench, and he performed really well. Got himself a second contract, and he was performing pretty well for the first 30, 40 games of the next season. And then he gets hurt at some points and he loses all of his confidence and he becomes borderline unplayable in the playoffs. He really only played significant minutes against Denver in that sweep of a series. And that was because Paul Millsap was out there being a small ball 5. And then he tears his ACL, misses all last season. And from what I could tell, he looks a little bit skinnier from when I watched him today. He definitely has been trying to mold into a new body that would be best suited for a player that's running the 4-man position. And he just hasn't gotten on the floor very much this year. He's been outplayed and outperformed by Jock Landale and Bismack Biyombo. And he had a pretty good game against San Antonio in the starting lineup when every wing was out. But I think that it's really hard to place a true value to him because his shooting numbers are down. He's still having to mold into a new body, and that's gonna scare off some teams, especially for teams that acquire him, they got this the team that he's got to go to can't be a contender because he needs time to, get some minutes in there, get some reps with this new adjustment period for him and just not worry about having to win games and instead trying to prove himself right and recoup his value that he once had in the league because I still think that he could be a really solid NBA player off the bench. Um, but he's performed, not very good. He hasn't played too much this season. And I think the only piece of value that he can provide for a team at this point is the fact that he's an expiring deal. And that's the luxury that, James Jones has with those two guys in particular. It's not too much of a luxury, not too much of a swing factor when it comes to getting particular players, but having $20 million worth of expirings, not only that, $20 million just sitting on the bench, and the fact that they could still do something to their roster that's credible is fascinating. And they have a level of value towards that, and especially since this free agency class is going to be much better than last year's, I think that to some teams having expiring contracts is going to be more valuable for this year. So I think that's where he holds most of his value at this point. Unless, when it comes to teammate stuff or, if some team wants to take a flyer on him. But I think that his money, the money that he's making for this year is what's going to be sought after, not necessarily the prospect of having him on your roster. I also have Landry Shamet. Out of those three, I think that he's the least likely to get traded, and that's unfortunate. It Landry has not performed very well in Phoenix at all. He got sent over here from Brooklyn in a trade that sent Javon Carter to Brooklyn and the 29th pick that became Darren Sharp. He's been a solid backup center in Brooklyn so far as they've now went to a winning record and now they're in the playoffs right now. And Javon Carter, they've since waived, but he's been a really good backup point guard in Milwaukee. And, that's it really sucks when you see your former players going to uh, the team that beats you. And now he's performing at a level that you didn't think that he was going to perform at. But to go back to Landry Shamet, he was brought over here because the Suns had a need for movement shooting. At that point, it was Book, it was Cam Johnson, and nobody else that you could really rely on when it comes to movement shooting. He was a younger guy as well, has fresher legs, and Monty really loves him to a fault, unfortunately. So when it came to Landry Shamet coming over here, I was skeptical at first because he didn't play in a playoff he didn't have consistent playoff minutes in the last 2 years. And he was on really good teams with, Kevin Durant, Kyrie, Harden, Kawhi, Paul George, um, if you want to go Marcus Morris. But he couldn't really find consistent minutes ever since his rookie year. Um, and he had a nagging ankle injury last year, and he just never got his consistency up at all. Shot it at what, maybe like 35% from three last year. Was not a very good shooter by any stretch of the imagination. And he was unplayable in last year's playoffs. Coming into this season, I don't want to think that I had higher hopes for him, but I'm just thinking like just get your shooting up. And he hasn't done that again either. He's very much a player. This is how I would describe him. If you're up by 30, 40, or if you're down 30, 40, that's when he's going to hit his three-point shots. If you need a three-pointer to swing momentum, to take the lead, um, you should not rely on Landry Shamet to do that for you. He's just not. He just doesn't have the confidence anymore at this point in time, and that sucks. I think that at this point, he's kind of in the same boat as Dario when it comes to he's got to go to a team where he doesn't have crazy expectations anymore. I remember JJ Redick a couple years ago, or just last year, talking about how when he was coming out of college, he was a natural point guard. And then he got, pigeonholed into this one role where he's, a spot up catch and shoot guy. And, that's not necessarily his game, he was saying, and that, he needs the ball in his hands a little bit more. What I will say is that he had success in the role that he was given into the NBA. And the expectation was that, especially since he was a younger guy, he was going to continue to shoot at those numbers or just around that and be a historically really good 3-point shooter. And he just hasn't displayed that at any point. As a matter of fact, he regressed. And now he's kind of lost, all of his ball handling confidence. I know that they try to play him at point guard a little bit this year coming off of the bench, but he's more so of a reclamation project at this point. It's going to be hard for any contender to, be sold on the idea that Landry Shamet could come back and be this 40% 3-point shooter. And I don't think that's realistic at this point either. And, they signed him to a contract extension before he played a game in Phoenix, and that really pissed me off. It was 4 years, 43 million, but it turns out it's only those first 2 years that are guaranteed. So it's technically like 2 years, 20 million, and then the rest is non-guaranteed. So, that's some clever contract work by James Jones. But Landry Shamet really has not earned a spot in the rotation up to this point. Especially with Josh Okogie really coming alive in the last couple of games. I think that he's a prime candidate to replace Shaman in the rotation. And by that point, you would have $30 million just sitting on the bench waiting to be traded. So, there's moves to be made with the contracts that they have. Now, what players they could get for those guys, not entirely sure. And probably not too much. But they got to do something with those contracts if, Landry Shamet being replaced in the rotation becomes a true reality. I do have DeAndre Ayton listed right here, and that's like the wild card. And I only see him getting traded in any event where a superstar comes over here, or just Kevin Durant coming over here. Um, he can't be traded until January 15th, due to the weird restriction when it came to matching a contract offer sheet. And he has veto rights on each trade until like July 14th. And he can't be traded or be a member of the Indiana Pacers, the team that signed him to an offer sheet, until that day either. So I don't expect him to be traded. I only have him as a wild card in the event that there are some teams that are willing to offload some of their star players or superstar players at that. But that's the only event that I can see DeAndre Ayton being traded. He provides a lot of value here in Phoenix right now. It's just he has so much potential that he needs to tap into. He needs to be a little bit more assertive, offensively speaking, a little bit more physical, to really help this team reach a different level. And if that's not the case, then I think that a superstar trade um, will be discussed internally by Phoenix. I'm not expecting it, but I have a guy listed right there in that event. They also have all of their draft picks, which is, a really good thing. They can't technically trade this year's first round pick until like the summer. And, the wording is, you can trade the draft rights to the player that's selected at that draft selection once the new league year hits. And by that point, legally, uh, that's not in. There's no problems with that in regards to the Stepien rule, which is the rule where you're not allowed to trade first round picks in back to back years. So, that's where everything stands on, players on the block. That's kinda how I had it in my notes, and I don't know why I have this set as comfortability. I'll just say this, there's yeah, I have a couple of gut feelings and based off of, just that and the things that I have read that have made me reach conclusions that are logical and are, I just have a really strong feeling about all of this stuff. Number one, everybody needs to get this into their heads. Jay Crowder is going to be traded. He's not coming back. Short and simple. I also don't think it's gonna be a 2-for-1 deal, in any deal, like us trading Jay Crowder plus Dario Saric or Jay Crowder plus Landry Shamet, for 1 player. I think that they're going to ask for, a second player. Now, who's that player might be, I have some ideas. We'll get there in a second. But I do think that, 2 of those players and some sort of draft compensation will be sent over to bring back 2 players, and I think that's a smarter-ish way to go about business. And this is kinda the weird part. I think that there's only 2 packages that Phoenix is willing to accept. The first package being, I think that they're looking for a young player that's, I would say, in that middle tier. Not with the Evan Mobleys or the Victor Wembanyama's, but not with like the Killian Hayeses and the Marvin Bagleys. Um, but within that middle tier, that player's in that hierarchy. And the player that I thought of was Franz Wagner, out of Orlando. And reportedly, that was a player of interest when it came to Jay Crowder trade for Phoenix. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's no shot that Franz Wagner is ever going to come to Phoenix, as cool as that would be. But you could tell, like, that's the level of player that Phoenix is expecting if they're just doing, if they're just getting rid of Jay Crowder and, they expect 1 player back, that's the type of player that they want. And whether that's right or wrong, that's certainly out there. And, they have an asking price, a strict asking price at that. Or they accept this second package, and that package is, taking back a sizable veteran salary of like maybe 16, 17, 18 million, along with like a project player, a young guy that maybe given up on within their team's rotation. We just take him back, as in, you know, we'll give him some spot minutes here and there, have a guy that has some upside. I can base that off of the fact that, when they tried to trade for Boyan Bogdanovic when he was in Utah, the rumor was Utah was willing to send Boyan to Phoenix if it meant that they got Crowder, Shamit, and draft compensation. But Phoenix uh, rebutted and sent over pretty much that same proposal, except they also wanted Jared Vanderbilt in the deal. Now, if Phoenix and Utah came to that agreement, whoo, they'd be in business right now. I love Jared Vanderbilt, and Boyan has really performed super well as a 20-point per game scorer in Detroit. But that ship has sailed for now when it comes to, getting Boyan Bogdanovic over to Phoenix. Um, and that's kind of like the level of packages that I'm expecting, which, leads me to this, kind of deal, because I don't think that a contender can fulfill the asking price of Phoenix's when it comes to Jay Crowder and their other stuff. And that's where I think that this will be a multi-team deal. I can also base this off of a report that came out saying that Phoenix, Houston, and Milwaukee neared a deal to send Crowder to Milwaukee. The framework being something along the lines of Eric Gordon to Phoenix, Jay Crowder to Milwaukee, Grayson Allen and a salary filler from Phoenix to Houston. And it mainly feels like the holdup was KJ Martin, which was a player that they've been rumored to be interested in since the summer. So I think that whatever deal happens, it's going to be a multi-team deal, and that's again, whether that's right or wrong, I think that, how Phoenix is trying to go about it, not trying to be fleeced and trying to squeeze out the most assets, in some cases can be wrong, just like last season. But at some point, you know, waiting it out and seeing how the market plays out and seeing how teams are near the deadline is at this point a smart strategy. And I there's so many teams that could really be included in this whole ordeal. I think that we could go to a team like Milwaukee, who are reportedly the front runners for him. I really like. I think that Grayson Allen is a pretty solid player. I don't expect that to be the return for Phoenix, but Milwaukee is clearly in on a guy like Jay Crowder. They've been looking for their PJ Tucker since last season after they lost him to Miami. And I don't want to say that was like the reason that they lost in the playoffs last year, because that's clearly not the case. But they've very much missed, a grizzled 3 and D wing that could, really coincide with a guy like Giannis, a guy like K Middleton, Drew Holiday. So I think that they're the leaders in the NBA when it comes to, their pursuits of Jay Crowder. So I would say keep your eye out on that team. I would also say Washington. Washington, I believe they've fallen to 11 and 14, and they're in this weird pit of mediocrity, just like the Chicago Bulls, where they have some young talent there. It's very clear who their young talent is and the potential that they do have. Uh, Specifically, all right, we'll get into players soon. But Washington, they've been mediocre for a number of years now, and at some point they gotta, look themselves in the mirror and say, "What are we really doing? Are we really going to go all in with the core that we have? Are we going to double down? Are we going to sell?" By all metrics and rumors that I'm seeing, they look like they are going to still be buyers at this point. I think that they're still pigeonholed with the contract that they signed Bradley Beal to, which was, an obscenely large contract. Congrats to Bradley Beal on that contract. I believe Kristaps is technically an expiring this year and can opt out and become a free agent this year. So we'll see with that. Same with Kyle Kuzma. I think that they're going to be in the running for, some guy that can potentially get that team over the hump. And maybe not, I don't think Jay Crowder is going to be the biggest swing factor for Washington making the playoffs, but I think that, Washington either acquiring Jay Crowder, who is a team that's had rumored interest in them, or just coming in on a multi-team deal. I think that's very feasible. We can also move over to Miami, who I think is the least likeliest to acquire Jay Crowder, unless they end up reaching that asking price of bringing in Max Strus into the deal as well. And I would just I would just say I don't think that at this point in time Miami should be selling, even though I kind of nonchalantly in one of our last shows for the semester say that Miami should just blow it up. It's really hard for them to, you know, find ways to improve with the assets that they have, because they clearly are, in love with Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo. What could they realistically get for a 37-year-old Kyle Lowry and a very wishy-washy up and down Duncan Robinson? What could they really do with that? And I think that, that's a team that has always had interest in Jay Crowder, and they really seem to regret letting him go in that 2020 off season. So I think that's a team that you'll repeatedly see pop up in rumors, and I think that will be the same for any player that is credible and is valuable to a playoff rotation. I think we'll always see them pop up in rumors. Um, I would say that's the least likeliest of those three. These other three teams, I would just have them in as filler teams when it comes to participating in a multi-team deal. I would say keep your eye on Detroit. In a very wild card scenario, I know that they still have interests in Boyan Bogdanovic. I think that's, you know, a player that has the interest of the Suns. I would also say keep your eye out on Charlotte. For some reason, I saw that they were like they were rumored to be interested in Jay Crowder. They're like the 13th, 14th seed. I don't think that they have any shot at the playoffs right now. I think, acquiring Jay Crowder should be the least likely of their concerns. But there's certainly players that on their roster that, I see fit into their into what needs that they have. So I kind of just threw them in there. I also have Houston. When it comes to that three-teamer, I don't think that it's completely dead. I think the fact that it was rumored um, out there, I don't think that Houston is completely out of the realm of possibility when it comes to the players that they have. And I didn't add the Atlanta Hawks to this list, but they're in a weird situation as well, where Trey Young is really underperforming, washed at 24, and Dejounte Murray has played really well, but it really is just a matter of like those two interchange pick and roll ball handling duties, and it's not really working out for the rest of the team when it comes to their averages and their impact on the game. And there's certainly guys that are going to be moved and going to be had. So I think that they could come in and swing a deal as either a third team or the team that is acquiring Jay Crowder. Those are like the seven. I have seven teams. Jesus. Those are like the seven teams that I immediately thought of when it came to a deal with the Phoenix Suns. And I have even more players. I have way more players that I have um, on the player watch. I titled it in my notes. Again, keep your eye out on Grayson Allen when it comes to Milwaukee. I don't think that Phoenix has interest in him, but I think that's the logical salary filler that Milwaukee needs to trade away in order to acquire the services of Jay Crowder. Now, I will say, like, the one risky thing about these contenders bringing in Jay Crowder, he hasn't had any real NBA work in the last, multiple months. He didn't attend training camp, and he's posting videos of him shooting around and catch and shoot shots in black and white videos uh, in an empty gym. And, that can only get you so far when it comes to your conditioning. Um, and I think you just got to come in with the expectation that he's not going to perform immediately, and especially very well, as, translatable as those skills that he has are to any playoff team. I think that there's going to be a longer ramp up period given the time that he has missed so far this season. I guess we'll move over to Washington when it comes to, guys to keep an eye out on. I have Kyle Kuzma as number one to keep an eye out on. I think that's like the really high end option if Washington were to move off of him. They have reported interest in John Collins, so I think that there is a logical three-team deal that could be in place. Although, one can only dream of having, a really good player come over to Phoenix or to Washington. But that's the really high-end option on Washington's roster. He's a very good shot creator. Everybody in the Suns community has been madly in love with the prospect of him on the Phoenix Suns. He is shooting some of his worst splits right now. I think he's still shooting above 40% from the field, but he's at 30% from the three-point line. But he does hold a lot of value when it comes to his rebounding, which is something that this team really struggles with, especially, offensive rebounds. And I think that he could provide value there. I think that he has the length defensively to be an irritant, not necessarily a pest, but he could definitely irritate people. And I think that, he's a 20-point per game scorer, which is something that Book, outside of that one season, which I would like to think that was his rookie year, Book's rookie year, where he didn't play too much, was the last time he had a 20-point per game scoring teammate, and that was Eric Bledsoe. Outside of that, there was a stretch where Kelly Oubre averaged 20 as a starter in like 12, 13 games in his first season here. But Jesus, like it's been such a long time since he's had credible help. And that's not it's not encouraging when, some of these guys, he has to carry the load and has been carrying the load the last 8 years. So, there's that, and Kyle Kuzma will really be a big help. But again, that's a high end option. That's a guy that's going to go for a little bit more than the average fan would like to think. Um, but again, that's the high end option. I still have three guys on Washington that I think have value in any sort of deal that involves Crowder or any of these other guys, maybe potentially as like a multi-team deal. I have Will Barton right here, who is having one of his worst seasons. He's not, I believe he's like sub 40% from the field, sub 30% from three. And especially for a guy that was, I think he was a playoff starter last year, right? He was starting with Denver. He wasn't performing very well at all in the playoffs, and he just kind of lost it. He lost his shooting touch. He has a little bit of his athleticism left, but he just hasn't been a very functional player so far to begin this season. And in any deal, I don't think that Will Barton becomes a Phoenix Sun necessarily, but just keep your eye out on him being involved in any deal if a deal were to be made. And then they have two other young guys that I have grown to really like. Roy Hashimura, good off the bench scoring when it comes to, he has also a, inside outside game that I really like. And I think that defensively speaking, I think that he's rock solid in the post. And I think that he could provide everything that Jay Crowder can, and he's younger. The only problem is that he's also in a contract year. He's going to be a restricted free agent after this year. But, that's certainly a guy to keep your eye out on. Same with Denny Avdia, which is a guy that, as I've watched him more and more and learned more about him, I really like what he can potentially bring over. He's still raw as a shooter. I always thought that he had solid shot mechanics to become like a 36, 37, 38% three-point shooter. But, that hasn't reached it yet. He was always a project player on the wings. And, I believe he had a career high during the season at like 21, 22 points. Defensively speaking, he's got great length. I think that he's got, really good hands. I think he's very good along the perimeter. He's also very good with his playmaking, his passing, rebounding as well. It's just the scoring that not necessarily is there yet. And it's always been a matter of he's got to stay, um, you know, the team's got to be patient with him, whichever team was going to draft him. And so far, it's been 3 seasons in the middle of his third season, and he hasn't displayed the greatest amount of scoring ability so far. But that's certainly a guy that definitely has my intrigue. I think that when it comes to a young guy for Phoenix, it's going to be these rejects, these guys that teams were kind of their previous teams were out on them, and Phoenix just kind of takes them in as kind of a send off. It's like the second inclusion of a player. I kind of think back to when the Suns acquired Kelly Oubre and how he was kind of a throw in with Austin Rivers. Um, and that, Washington at that time was also, trying to push for the playoffs, was really trying to buy. And they were willing to give up a young player. And, history can very much repeat itself here in Washington. Now we can move over to Miami. I think the only two that you can really think of is Duncan Robinson and Max Strus. I don't think Max Strus ends up becoming a Sun at any point, unfortunately. But that's certainly a guy that's been rumored to be of interest for the Phoenix Suns. And Duncan Robinson's the salary filler, the inclusion that will make a Jay Crowder to Miami trade work. And he's the logical option to go, especially since Strus has been very, very good throughout his couple of years in the NBA. but I don't think we needed to spend too much time on them. I don't think that they have the necessary assets to really fulfill what Phoenix is trying to get with these players and their draft compensation. And Detroit's the very interesting inclusion of a team because I think that Boyan is the player that Phoenix wants the most. I think they've been interested in him since they were trying to do 4-team deals with Durant. They really wanted Boyan to come over to Phoenix, so much so that they waited until September in terms of discussions, and they couldn't get him. But I would say, especially since Detroit is in the middle of a really bad season so far, a season where Cade Cunningham is out for a while, and um, they're in the Wembenyama sweepstakes, and that's going to be key to the next player that I have up, which again is another wild card option, a high end option when it comes to the Pistons. Now, this has got to be a matter of, they continue to lose and that they're willing to sell, but it's also a matter of, I saw a report that came out on Detroit's part, and it said that Detroit's pressuring Cade Cunningham to get surgery on his shins right now to miss the rest of the season and just tank for Wemby, tank for one of them top prospects. And if that's the case, one of those guys is going to be replacing Sadiq Bey in the lineup. And that's the other option that I have up there. He's in the middle of a down season as well. He's up for a contract extension after this season. And I don't think that they want too much money tied up to them right now, especially when he's playing at his worst, and they're going to have a lot of cap space for next off season. And somebody does eventually have to go. Um, with whichever player that they end up picking up in the draft. Given that, I did my best to kind of logically piece together why they would trade away Sadiq Bey. Again, that's a high end option, and that would definitely fit in with the 2-player package that Phoenix has been trying to acquire for the players that they're offering up. But I would deem that as unlikely. I would also throw in Alec Burks from Detroit. I think that his ball handling, his shooting, is something that is very desired in Phoenix. I don't think that they have a 2 guard that can really handle the ball as well as Book or Josh. Nobody else can really do that as a 2 guard for this team, and he can do exactly that. He provides veteran leadership, has always been solid defensively as well. We can move over to Charlotte, and again, they're more so high-end options. Um, because I remember in the summer there was, some stuff saying that, Shamit, Saric, and Crowder may potentially be moved in a package. And just keep an eye out um, on teams that are potentially selling. That was kind of how it was worded. It was very vague, and I hate vagueness. But the first player that I thought of was Gordon Hayward. You combine all of those salaries, it adds up to 30 million, and he'll be coming off of the bench in Phoenix in a scenario like that. But I'm just kind of thinking of the prospect of, okay, Charlotte's in a bad season right now. LaMelo's been out for damn near this entire season, and there's a couple of guys that are performing here and there, and Gordon Hayward's out with an injury right now. That contract clearly hasn't worked out to what they were hoping that um, they were hoped that they were going to have success with the contract that they signed him to, and that's not been the case. Given his injury history as well, I think that he's going to be a little bit more on the cheaper side. I think you throw in some expire, it's kind of weird saying. I think you could put in some expirings, and you could potentially get him along with the first as a salary dump to go get him. I think that his value is much lower than previously from a couple of years ago. Again, that's another higher end option. I'm not entirely sure that Phoenix is down to take on another 30 million on a guy that is getting up there in age, is losing a bit of his athleticism and whatnot. So again, I'm not totally sold on him eventually becoming a Sun at all, but just wanted to throw the name out there. I would also throw out Kelly Oubre again, which is another unlikelier name, but that certainly fits the mold of what Phoenix does need, and that's length, that's athleticism, that's shot creation, which is something that he was able to provide in his um, like 1.5 seasons here in Phoenix, and he did a pretty good job at it. Now it's just a matter of if he can keep his tunnel vision from getting into the way of, how Phoenix is trying to play right now, and that's team basketball. But Kelly Oubre is, still a very, very good player, and I think that, um, I only deem it as unlikely because, for one, they traded him, and he has beef with the previous owner, and I think that there was definitely some things exchanged between him, the players. I think that he didn't like how the players didn't reach out too much after he left Phoenix. I think that there's definitely a little bit of personal stuff when it comes to Kelly Oubre in Phoenix, and I don't think that it's likely. The last player that I have for Charlotte would be PJ Washington, a guy that's been on the trade block for a number of years as well. I think that I think he's also going to enter restricted free agency this year. Um, I think you take a look at, what he can provide. He's more so of like a small ball five. I think he's like 6'8", 6'9". It's the weirdest, it's a weird body frame for what, he can really do. And that's, he's mainly a big man that stretches the floor very well in some cases. I think a couple of games ago, he had a not so very good shooting game. I think he was like 0 of 7 from three. But I think that there is a level of, Phoenix doesn't have that level of a shooter, especially as a big man. And I think that when it comes to a guy like Chris Paul at this stage of his career who always needed a floor spacer next to him, or somebody that was able to hit the three-pointer, Blake Griffin eventually evolved into that. I believe that they had PJ Tucker for that as well. Danilo Gallinari is the main guy that I think of when it comes to a bigger guy stretching the floor. I think that he could definitely provide some value. He is also much younger, and I think that, youth definitely plays a part into what Phoenix is trying to do with their rotations, with their trade discussions. Houston, I think, is pretty logical. Eric Gordon and KJ Martin, they've been linked to Eric Gordon since last December. They couldn't get it done at the deadline last year. They were rumored to be interested in him before the draft, this past draft. And I think that there is definitely, I feel like the stars are eventually going to align when it comes to Eric Gordon becoming a Sun. Phoenix tried to get him in 2012 when he was a restricted free agent. He signed the offer sheet and went out and said, Phoenix is my home. And then the contract got matched and he went back to New Orleans. And I just feel like at some point, he is going to return home and come to Phoenix, whether that be through a trade or whether that be through the buyout market. At some point, he's just got to be here. And then KJ Martin, not the highest upside, but certainly has athleticism, has defense that could be tapped into. He's also tried to shoot the ball from downtown a little bit more. His percentages from three-point land have always been pretty okay, like 35%, 34%. And for what he's supposed to be doing as as a screener, as a defender, as an athletic finisher, I think it's really encouraging that he is really trying to work on that three-point shot, but I don't think that there's too much upside in him becoming a legitimate star in this league. And that's where I could, really throw in like a project player for Phoenix. I think that's a guy that I could see at the very least being a very good rotation player in the event that a guy like Torrey Craig goes out, a guy like Damian Lee goes out. And Jesus, we're already an hour in. Jeez. Last team, the Atlanta Hawks. I think that John Collins is not going to come to Phoenix in any deal. I'll just put that out there. Shams worded it very weirdly when he reported the Suns have interest in him. He was worded like, I'm only paraphrasing here. The Phoenix Suns are interested in John Collins, the player, but not John Collins, the contract. So essentially saying that they're not interested in him. Um, but that's certainly a guy that I could see in trade discussions much later on down the line in a multi-team deal. And that's kind of why, I have a potential trade like just lined up for the hell of it near the end of this episode. And then Bogdan Bogdanovic, a guy that was also should have stayed a Sun if it weren't for a silly draft mistake a number of years ago. But he's just really solid at everything. And, that's a very cliche way of saying that, he's a solid NBA player. But he's able to shoot the ball, relatively well. Except for tonight, he shot only 0 of 10 from the three-point land in his, like, first couple of games back from knee surgery. But, that's certainly he's always been a solid shooter throughout his career. Was always able to handle the ball very well. I think that playing in the EuroLeague, um, really did, numbers when it came to, his confidence, handling the ball and being a playmaker, which is always which is now something that he's very solid at. Solid on the perimeter, solid at the point of attack. Doesn't have the greatest athleticism, but it also is just, a solid offensive player, solid defensive player. That's where he's going to provide his value, is just everywhere on the court. He's going to provide something very solid for you. Now, he's on $18 million. How will that eventually work into a three-teamer? Because I don't think that the Suns are willing to trade Jay Crowder and Landry Shamet for Bogdan Bogdanovic. As weird as that sounds, I I think that they're a very stingy team at that. And Arizona Sports Gambo has not, he hasn't ruled out Kyle Kuzma at all, but he's saying highly unlikely for Bogdan. I kind of want to, dance away from that and just, go ahead and think that Bogdan, fits needs for this Suns team. And I think that there's some logic when it comes to Bogdanovich becoming a Sun finally, or again. I think that he was also destined to be a Sun. That's where he should be. That's where he should have been. And if a deal comes about, I think that's a guy to also keep an eye on. And that's the last guy that I have to keep my eye on. That's 17 players to keep your eye on in any sort of Crowder, Shamit, Saric draft compensation deal. I'm not going to include any of these superstars or superstar trades or anything like that. But, that's certainly not out of the cards. DeAndre Ayton, I certainly wouldn't even rule out, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, even Chris Paul. I think that the only untouchable on this roster is Devin Booker. And if they went ahead and made a drastic trade, only throwing the name out there, but let's just say like they went ahead and tried to go get Giannis Antetokounmpo. You sell the house, you sell Scottsdale, as a matter of fact, to go get Giannis and pair him with Book. That's kind of the logic right there. If you're able to get a superstar player, do everything in your power to keep Book and bring him over to Phoenix. Now, I'm not comfortable making too much of a prediction right now. It is December, like very early December. The 15th hasn't even come and gone yet. But I mean, I always had the gut feeling that Eric Gordon and KJ Martin would eventually become Phoenix Suns. But I just think that there's way too much at this point in time when it comes to their interest in Bojan Bogdanovic and Kyle Kuzma. I think that there's definitely multi-team deals to be done, but I think, I'm not going to give a prediction right now, but gut feeling at this point in time is uh, either Bojan Bogdanovic or Kyle Kuzma becomes a Phoenix Sun, along with maybe some other player or maybe some draft pick. But I think that Kyle Kuzma is a legitimate guy that Phoenix should and always should have been interested in. And damn, who was the first guy that I brought up? Bojan Bogdanovic is a guy that they've always been interested in, and I think that um, scoring wise, those guys could provide some really nice value for the Suns team. Who that second player might be, not entirely sure, but I think that a package built around that, I think that they're going to push really hard to include multiple teams, to include multiple players in their deal. I think that they're really targeting the higher end options when it comes to moving some of their mid guys. And I guess that's the end of this episode. I don't really have too much else to say. Um, School's over now. I have about another month before I head back to school, which means I can chill out a little bit, do some, go to work, watch some games. Hopefully, the Cardinals and Suns don't disappoint me as much as they have been. Um, and sorry about like the no football stuff. Like, I really haven't been keeping up too much with football. I know what's going on around the league. I know, I watch the highlights, but I haven't delved deep. I haven't dove deep into any of these games much at all. I've had uh work every Sunday this entire season, and that's, really cut into my time when it comes to watching football. So I don't have too many credible thoughts or legitimate thoughts on this NFL season so far. Other than the Cardinals stink and everybody should be gone in that front office. But again, if you guys have made it to the end of this episode, I hope that I can come back pretty soon. I miss doing this sorts of stuff from time to time. It's just, scheduling sometimes can get the best of me. But one more time, that's the end of today's episode. Thank you guys for listening. And I will be back soon. I can guarantee that I'll be back pretty soon. All right. Y'all have a good one. Stay safe, and we are done.